Hi, my name is Chris Montgomery, and I'd like to welcome you to this week's episode of TNTV. Today we're going to be talking about backup and disaster recovery, and for that discussion I have with me Aaron Oliver, who is our Senior Network Infrastructure Engineer. So we're going to talk again a little bit about disaster recovery and backup solutions, and really what we find in the marketplace as a whole. So Aaron, what I typically find in the folks that I deal with day in and day out is that they typically don't value a good backup or disaster recovery solution until really it's too late. Would you agree with that statement in your experiences out in the field?
I would. We see that regularly. People don't even worry about the backup solution or their disaster recovery plan until they've lost all of their data or until they have to recover and find out how much harder it is than they had planned on it being.
Yeah. And I would assume that assumption is just predicated on the old mindset of, well, everything's in a file drawer or what have you, and I can always access that. It's no big deal. I've got copies of it maybe somewhere else. But realistically, coming back to technology, I mean, it's a lot more involved than that.
Right. Copies of something may not be enough. You need a plan to restore those copies and be able to use them again. It's not like a paper file folder you can pull out of the drawer and just look at.
Yeah. So before we get into exactly what the differences are and what exists out there in the market, I wanted to just go into a few statistics that I had found just doing some simple research this morning. Specifically, Gartner estimates that only about 35% of small businesses or small to medium-sized businesses out there actually have a comprehensive disaster recovery plan in place. International Data Corporation estimates that companies lose an average of $84,000 for every hour of downtime. Now, granted, this is not just lost revenue coming into the business. This is including time to restore, what the processes are to get all that back in place, and the laundry list goes on because, again, it's a lot more involved than just, okay, well, our building burned down or our server failed, and how are we going to proceed from here? There's a lot of different things that need to happen, and if you don't have a good DR or backup solution in place, what typically ends up happening is now you got to take it to somebody. Hopefully they can retrieve that information off of a hard drive, if they can even get to it. And that's assuming it's not too damaged or anything else. So we have that working against us. And then realistically, most of your disaster recoveries that are seen out there are going to be things like true disasters, meaning tornadoes, hurricanes, floods. That's usually what we find. I actually met with a client just yesterday who was in a hospital of all places, and they had 30 workstations that needed to be replaced because they had a flood. And the least, at the least place you'd least expect that to actually happen. So, and then finally, the survival rate of companies without a disaster recovery plan in the event of a complete catastrophic disaster, in the sense that everything is completely wiped out. If they don't have a plan in place, typically less than 10% actually survive such a disaster, because with all that goes all their client files, all the people they were working on securing as new clients, and the list goes on, and that doesn't even account for payables and receivables and all their vendor information, etc. So now that we've uncovered a little bit of the statistical research that's out there and why a good disaster recovery plan is important, let's talk first and foremost about, people talk about backups and they talk about disaster recovery. So let's talk just for a minute about what is the difference, if any, between the two.
Well, Chris, what you've got is backups are just a small piece of disaster recovery. Disaster recovery should be kind of an all-encompassing plan. And as a business owner, small, medium business, or a principal or decision maker for a business, you've got to be thinking of not just your backups, but a plan in the event that your building, your IT infrastructure, and everything else goes down. If your building burns down, how fast do you need to be up and operational again? Are you a manufacturing plant? Do you sell insurance? Depends on what you're doing is going to really determine on how fast you need to be back up and what kind of impact losing your building or your IT infrastructure is going to have on you.
Okay.
So we really have to, as a decision maker, look at the overall picture and what are you going to do in the event of a building loss. Are you going to operate from home? Are your employees going to operate from home? Are you going to rent a space, grab an empty warehouse and go buy computers and get everybody fired back up? And then how are you going to get your information once you've got something like that in place? So backups are a small piece of that disaster recovery plan. Just because you have your data backed up doesn't mean that you're going to be able to use that data if your building burns down, the next day or the following week even. It all comes down to how well you've planned. If we have a disaster, what are the steps we're going to take to get back into business and continue to operate and continue to turn a profit without losing too much money?
So what I'm hearing you say is that there needs to be, for lack of a better way to put it, a protocol in place, some sort of operational protocol that in the event of a complete disaster, here is the method that we're going to employ in order for us to be back up and operational within a minimum amount of time. So what you've touched a little bit on the things that people need to be thinking about. One of the other things that I'd like to talk about as well is what does a good DR plan look like? Since we've discussed what needs to be thought about, what should that plan look like ideally if you're a business owner and you want to ensure that you're going to mitigate as much risk as possible?
I would say you probably want to have the plan on paper for one. I mean,
Okay.
it's one of those things a lot of people say, if this happens, we're going to do X, Y, Z. But is there a plan in place? If you're out of town, can one of the other decision makers of the business actually execute the plan that you have in your mind?
Okay.
So you want to put it on paper, have procedures, have a budget possibly in mind so that if we lose everything, how much money are we going to spend right out of the gate? How much is insurance going to pay for if we lose our entire building and all of our IT infrastructure? So can we put this stuff on some kind of a credit or a lease until we get money back from the insurance company? You kind of have to start figuring out budgets and things like that. How are we going to get operational? So if you put it on paper, you write out the plan, not just you, but one of your successors or other decision makers can carry out that plan.
Okay.
And then you have to start thinking about how do backups play into that and what do we need to have from our IT infrastructure in order to get back up and running outside of a place to work and machines or a way to purchase machines to do business with. So
Okay, okay. And that makes sense. It does make sense. So really you've got two components again. You've got the backup solution being a very small piece of a full-on disaster recovery plan. So ideally documenting everything that you're going to do. But then in addition to that with disaster recovery, you have certain things that exist out there in the market that allow for, well, disaster recovery to take place, for lack of a better way to put it. Not to say you wouldn't still have a plan in place, but this can help to alleviate a lot of that plan right out of the gate. One I've seen out there in the market is capable of actually, your server goes down and it's just say a server crash, it can actually take over and serve as a server until such time as that new server is in place, correct?
yeah, from a disaster recovery standpoint, there are a lot of things that from your IT infrastructure piece, ThrottleNet can help with, and the things that are out on the market as far as everybody hears the buzzword cloud all the time. They also hear virtualization. And so there are appliances and backup procedures you can take to put all of your information in more than one physical location. Geographically, you want it in multiple places if you can. That way, if you do have a fire or let's say a flood or a tornado in your region, it's not just at your house or which might be down the street from your business and a tornado takes out both places. You want to have that data offsite somewhere, some kind of secure data center, maybe bi-coastal, so that you can get to that data in the event of a regional disaster. And so some of the appliances that can do that will not only back up your servers and keep your servers backed up on site, it'll also push that data out to some bi-coastal data centers or to the cloud, if you will, which is basically just another term for storage off-site somewhere. But if we've got that data off-site, or if you've got your actual IT infrastructure virtualized in the cloud, this would allow you to kind of budget a little better for the disaster we kind of talked about earlier. You don't have to go out and buy a bunch of new machines right off the bat. You can even have your infrastructure set up so that if your employees have computers at home, they'd be able to connect to the existing infrastructure that you already had or copies of that infrastructure out in the cloud and allow them to start operating much more quickly without having to go and worry about the building or worry about buying machines. And it gives you a little more time to actually operate as a business and keep money flowing so that you're not completely just draining everything in the budget.
Yeah, trying to get yourself back up
That's
on your
right.
feet again.
Yeah.
So, no, that makes sense to me. So, when you're thinking in terms, so let's bring it down then to, since we've discussed what a DR looks like and what people should be thinking about when considering disaster recovery and having that plan, writing it out, knowing what to do, investigating different technology in the marketplace that can allow them to get back up and operational. I think you and I would agree that there are some organizations that say, you know what, I'm just going to employ a good backup. I mean, that's what I'm going to focus on. As long as we've got good, solid backups, the disaster recovery plan and business continuity and allowing people to access information, say from their homes, as you outlined a moment ago, becomes somewhat of a moot point. So we'll bring it down then strictly to just backup. Again, in my experiences out in the field, what I have found interesting is that people typically don't discern between backing up files and folders only, and then doing a backup, say, of an entire system and imaging that system. So if you could elaborate a little bit on the difference between backing up files and folders versus doing a full backup of everything as far as your infrastructure is concerned.
Yeah, far as backup types go, you've got the classic tape backup, or even backup to a hard drive that uses some of the more popular products like Symantec or Acronis, some of these other things that just back up files and folders. Maybe your Active Directory structure, which is basically all of your users, your settings, and how people access the network. If you lose that, then you lose access to all of your data as well. And so what we see is that a lot of people are still employing some of these backup techniques from the 90s and earlier in the 2000s where you use tapes, and people would rotate tapes on and off site.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is tapes, everybody's had a cassette tape,
Yeah.
placed it too close to a magnet and erased the thing.
You and I have.
Correct, correct. And so some of the younger generation may not know what that is.
Yeah, they have
but,
no idea what we're talking about.
Business owners, if they're rotating these tapes off-site, you're really putting your entire company's well-being at risk, because you've got this tape in your purse, in your car, taking it home, melts on your dash. I've seen people stick them on a dash before. And so tape backups are a thing of the past. We still see that a lot.
And to interject for a moment here, another interesting statistic to your point that I found is that even those organizations that have tape backups, about 34% of them aren't actually testing those tape backups.
Absolutely.
So they think that they're running a backup and they're cycling this thing through and sticking it in their purse or putting it in their duffel bag and taking it home every weekend, only to find out when a disaster occurs, oh, this thing's blank.
Yeah, and it may not even be blank. It may be that the data is there, but the process to recover data from a tape is a lot more complex than with like an image backup that backs up basically a snapshot of your image or of your servers as they stand right now.
Yeah.
And so when you back up these files and folders, if you do have a server die, you have to rebuild that server. Then you have to try to reapply not just the files and folders, but you have to try to reapply your domain settings, your usernames, your passwords. You have to rebuild all of that.
Okay.
And then you can rebuild the files and the folders with all the important data and the nuts and bolts of your business.
Okay.
So if you are doing just a tape backup or a file and folder backup, your disaster recovery plan, if you will, is going to take a lot longer to execute because your restore time goes from, with an image backup, you might restore in an hour or two to a piece of hardware. It can be even a different piece of hardware. With a tape backup, you have to rebuild your servers, you have to reapply all these updates, you have to reapply your domain credentials, then your files and folders. Sometimes it's a 48-hour process of somebody sitting on site. And so if you're paying an IT professional to do this, not only are you out all the time of your employees sitting around doing nothing and paying their salaries, you're paying for the IT staff and their salaries, and then you're also just losing money on your production, whatever your production might be. You're losing critical business time, critical
new prospects,
time with
clients.
the customers, prospects, all of those kinds of things. So
Yeah, and that comes back to that figure I had mentioned earlier with the $84,000 for every hour of downtime. People don't think of you're still paying people that are working for you, whether they're working or not in some cases, especially if they're salaries. So, then you have everything else that you had outlined. So that figure adds up pretty quick when you think in terms of all the different aspects of how your business is impacted and what the expenses are going to be associated with that. So, So we talked about a file and folder backup and doing tapes. So let's talk a little bit then about what you had touched on as far as an image-based backup. What does that look like? How does that typically work? And then you'd mentioned that really reduces your downtime as a whole. So give me some insight there.
Yeah, there's several different types of image backup, but we recommend that all customers have some sort of image backup solution.
Okay.
What image backups do is they basically take a snapshot of your server so that your server as a whole, including your files, your folders, your settings, all the Windows updates, the operating system, everything is in this snapshot. It condenses it down to a smaller file, so it compresses it, saves you some space on your backup destinations and your hardware that's required for backup. But then it also allows you to do several different things with your backup solution. You can, if a server dies, you can run out to the store and buy another piece of equipment locally and restore that data to that new piece of hardware.
Okay.
Where with a file and folder backup, you can do the same thing, but once again, you're 48 hours in. With this, if you've got another machine on hand that you can restore to, it might be a 1.5 or 2 hour process to restore the whole machine, you're back up and functional.
Okay.
So it's a lot more streamlined as far as that goes. And there's a lot of different ways to accomplish a image backup, and we employ several different options for customers to use, whether it be a software solution or a physical appliance of some sort. And then there are multiple components of that, as we've talked about with disaster recovery. What do you do with these backups once they're done? Do you save them on site? Do you rotate a disk or a tape off site? Do you push these images to the cloud? Do you push files and folders to the cloud and then also push the images to the cloud for disaster recovery? And that all comes back down to what kind of business you run, what's an acceptable amount of time for you to be down or non-productional as a company, whether it's manufacturing or insurance sales or outside sales or whatever the case might be, medical clients.
Yeah.
And I know with a lot of these different verticals or business types, you've got different requirements
Okay.
put on you, whether it be HIPAA or compliance with PCI for credit cards or PCI for financial data. So,
Okay. So you got a variety of different compliance-related issues you need to adhere to when assembling a good disaster recovery plan. Because
Yep.
ideally, it's been looked at and said, okay, these are best practices
Absolutely.
as far as we're concerned. So let's talk just for a moment here as we kind of wrap things up on. So you're running backups, at least you think you are. What should you be doing to ensure that you do have, in fact, a true backup that's good, that's going to restore properly, it's going to have all your data information on it? What is a method that a business should employ in order to ensure that happens?
Well, and this all comes down to what type of backups you're running. And as you stated, we do have a hybrid solution that we use. That hybrid solution can kind of change between one customer and another. You can have one customer that has a piece of software that we license that it backs up the images to a drive, like you said, that is rotated off-site. And in addition to that, we take all of your important files and folders daily and push them to the cloud. And if your place burns down, you've got a week-old image on your hard drive. What do you do there? Like you said, you restore it and you bring those files back down from the cloud. Everything's good. We have other backup strategies that some of our customers require no downtime at all. And so we have an appliance that we put on site that basically would act as your server. So the backup appliance not only backs up the images of all of your servers, but in the event of a hardware failure, not necessarily a disaster, but just a hardware failure on site, that device will basically virtualize your running server, and you fire it up in a few minutes, and now you're running off of that device. So if it takes you 2 weeks to order a new server and actually get one with the specs that are needed to run your business, you can run for 2 or 3 weeks on that device right there on your site and not have really any downtime other than the initial half hour to an hour of downtime to report it to someone, let them say, yep, your server hardware has failed. Let's go ahead and virtualize the latest backup, pull those files and folders down from the cloud. So we have appliances that do that as well. And then also when it comes to those appliances, most of the appliances that we employ also offer virtualization offsite.
Okay.
So what that would basically entail is if your business does burn down, all of your virtual machines or all of your IT infrastructure servers and things like that were being backed up by that device can be turned on in the cloud and accessible from a home computer or from new computers that you may buy your employees to work off-site or at a temporary location. And so it really depends on what type of backup solution you go with, and the type of backup solution you're going to go with is based on your budget, how important their backups, and how much downtime do you want to incur.
So if you have a good backup in place, and assuming that that's the case, again, is there a method they should adhere to when it comes to restoring backups, daily, weekly, monthly? And
yeah, you should have some sort of a check in place so that you're not just operating on faith. You've got some real intelligent data saying, yep, if we have a failure, we are absolutely going to be able to be back up. And so what Thrallent does, like with our managed service offering, is we actually check your backups daily. So we verify that the image backup is running every day. We verify that the backups run on a weekly and a monthly basis. We also not only check the backups, but we'll try to restore files.
Okay.
If you're one of these companies that requires no downtime, not only do you want to be able to restore some of those files and folders, but every so often you want to do a disaster recovery test. And that is something we do for several clients where we will fire up a virtual machine on one of these appliances, or we'll take one of those image backups from a piece of software and maybe restore it to an extra piece of hardware that we or the customers may have on site. Restore it to that and just make sure that machine will fire up and that all of the data is there, everything's intact, and that it's functional. So you want to do that on a regular basis as well, because that kind of gives you some peace of mind that, if something fails, not only do I have one method, I may have 2 or 3 different methods of getting my business back up and running without incurring too much downtime and keeping my business impact at a minimum. So.
Okay. Well, it's a lot of information to digest, and when it comes to backup and disaster recovery solutions, of course, we always recommend bringing in somebody who is agnostic when it comes to those types of solutions to look at what your business need is, have an in-depth discussion and ask questions around what an acceptable amount of downtime is, and then what the best way to mitigate risk associated with that downtime and ensuring that it does stay within that established guideline. So again, I appreciate your time today, Aaron. Thank you so much for coming in and visiting with me, and also appreciate your time as well. And thank you so much for joining us on TNTV.